A question I get asked pretty regularly is how to protect yourself in a business partnership. This is vitally important when you factor in that you may not know what is at risk and you may be getting into something that can be incredibly dangerous. We've got to keep that from happening. In this video, you're going to see how partnerships really work. You're going to find out the general risk involved in partnerships. I'm going to show you why a partnership is the most dangerous legal arrangement you could possibly be involved in. You're going to find out about the automatic risk when you partner up with someone in business. I'll share with you the most important steps in doing things the right way. You'll find out how to limit your liability and protect your assets. I'm going to show you the different threats to protect against. All right, now the first thing we have to take a look at is understanding partnerships. Now I get it. In theory, partnerships sound great. You know, I work with a lot of real estate investors, and a lot of times we'll have arrangements where maybe someone has money, but they don't have time. Someone else has time, but they don't have money, or somebody has certain expertise that the other person doesn't have. So they think, you know, I love the idea of real estate. I'd love to invest my money in real estate. I just don't have the time to do it. I don't have the expertise. Someone else says, well, I've got expertise and I've got time. I just don't have capital. Well, this seems like a match made in heaven. Well, it actually can be quite hellish if we get down to it. Because what you have to understand are the risks that are involved in this type of situation. Let's take a look at those risks. You know, think about this. If we understand for a moment that in the scenario where someone has money and somebody else has time and or expertise that they're bringing to the project, once again, it sounds like this can be an ideal arrangement, but here's the downside. What happens in the event of a lawsuit? Well, let's think about that for a moment. Both parties have liability. The person that brought in the money may be thinking to themselves, okay, the maximum I stand to lose is the amount of my investment in the partnership. They're wrong, because they also have additional liability in the event that a potential lawsuit could yield a judgment that exceeds the amount of the assets in that partnership. I know that's a mouthful, but basically what we're saying is that the lawsuit is higher than the amount of money or the amount of assets in that business partnership. Well, if the assets are not sufficient to cover that judgment, they go after the partner's personal assets. Well, let's go back to the arrangement. We had one party that had no money but had time or expertise. And now maybe you had the money that you invested here. Well, guess what? If that person didn't have money to start the partnership, they're not going to have money to cover the judgment. So guess whose assets are at risk now? Sad to say, your assets. So if you think about this partnership, it may sound great, but we've got to understand the risk because it can be just too risky to be involved in. You know, because of these risks involved in partnerships, I tell people all the time, I personally believe, and I think it's backed up by significant documentation to substantiate this point, that this is probably the most dangerous type of business arrangement you could possibly be involved in because there's no limited liability. See, just a general partnership, basically, you are this type of structure unless you take steps to do things differently. You know, it's what I call the default structure. When there's one person involved, the default structure is a sole proprietorship. You have no protection. When there are two people, the default is a general partnership. You've got no protection. In that general partnership, both of your assets are at risk. Not just your assets in that business, but your personal assets as well. You could have that judgment attached to you personally, so now your liability is far greater than you thought it was going to be when you first entered into that partnership. Something you need to think about, and it's something that most people have no idea about because they think going into that partnership that, okay, well, I'll set aside a certain amount of money. I'm willing to lose this. I'm a big boy. I'm a big girl. I understand that. I recognize the risk. Do you? Well, that's the biggest challenge here. Most people don't. That's why I'm sharing these types of strategies with you so that you can better position yourself to gain maximum profit and maximum protection. Have you found yourself in a partnership that cost you a lot of money? Hey, let us know about that. Put something in the comments just to let us know what your experience has been with partnerships. Hopefully it hasn't been catastrophic, but share your experience with us. All right, so we've talked about the dangerous nature of partnerships. We've talked about the risks involved. Now let's take a look at what we can do to gain that protection that we desperately need when we're going to have this arrangement. Because let's go back to the very beginning and think about it. Partnerships sound great in theory. It's a great concept. It's a great idea. It's something that we can get the best of both worlds in many instances, because we can say, hey, I still want to invest in real estate, or I want to invest in this business. I just don't have the time to do it. I don't have the expertise to do it, but I still want those returns. Then how can we do this? Well, you need to separate yourself from the partnership. Now, by separating yourself from the partnership, what I'm talking about is maybe you are not a partner. Maybe you set up a limited liability company to be the partner in the partnership. So you can still have a partnership, maybe a joint venture, where your LLC partners up with somebody else's LLC. Well, sure, you still have the same risk of, in the event that a judgment is filed against you and the assets of that judgment or the assets of that partnership are not enough to cover that judgment, they're going to go after the personal assets of the partners. That's the beauty of this. If it's a limited liability company, it has limited liability. Sure, you may lose all the assets in that company, but that's okay. That's a calculated risk. We've always got to make sure that we do things the right way. So many times people just don't know. And it's kind of hard to protect against something you don't know. That's why we make these videos, is to make sure that you do know. So now let's take a look at how we can protect against these risks. We know that a partnership can be one of the most dangerous structures we could be involved with, but how can we make it less dangerous? Well, the way that we do this is to separate yourself from the partnership. Now, let's break that down for just a second. In order to separate yourself, you've got to set up a separate legal entity. You see, so that's an added step. So yeah, it's going to be a little bit more complicated, but it's going to make sure that you have the protection that you need. See, by setting up an LLC, it's pretty basic, pretty easy. It's not that difficult. Of course, there are certain things that need to be done that can make things a little more advanced. Remember, you've got to have an operating agreement. You've got to have the right documentation. So setting it up is not enough, but that's the first step, is setting up a separate legal entity to operate your part of that partnership. That way you separate yourself, you separate your assets, and your personal assets will no longer be at risk. Okay, so when we're talking about a lawsuit, we're talking about an outside threat. Now, there may be an inside threat, just maybe that partner decides that they're upset with you. Why do you think partnerships typically end? Well, it's because partnerships in theory work. The challenge is the partners have problems with one another. Now, what does your documentation say? One of the things that most people just forget about, or they just didn't know about, or they just didn't think about it, was that you've got to have documentation in place. That's what lawyers do. We draft documentation on how this partnership will be governed. How is this joint venture going to be governed? How is your LLC going to be treated as part of this overall partnership? Yeah, there are outside threats from potential lawsuits, but the inside threats from the other partners, if you've got more than one partner, all of a sudden now we've got potential for conflict. It's not a possibility, it's a probability. So we've got to make sure we protect against that. And when it comes to having this protection in place, you may think, no, but I'm never going to have that type of argument. I'm never going to have that disagreement. That's what people say all the time when they do have that. You see, when it comes to having this level of protection, I follow a simple adage. It's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. We talk about this particular strategy along with multiple other strategies in a special gift that I have for you, my mini course that I call Enlightened Asset Protection. You can access that absolutely free of charge by clicking the link below. And I promise you, you're going to learn some strategies that can greatly, greatly cover your assets. I'm JJ Childers. Thanks for watching.